welcome to the Gospel Jazz. We're here having conversational improv through life, leadership, and Jesus. We are continuing our conversation on Todd Bolsinger's book, Canoeing the Mountains. And so, who wants to start us off?
Go ahead. You had some good... Oh, all right. I'll start. One of the early things that shows up in the book is he makes a distinction between technical problems, which he identifies as things like replacing a furnace or a roof, or dealing with not enough parking, or resurfacing the parking lot. Those kinds of budgetary issues that you have to deal with. I mean, and he doesn't try and say those are unimportant by any stretch. I mean, he understands that those are part of the organizational life. Yeah. But he says that is where a lot of churches get hung up. And he said the most important thing when you are kind of identifying a new path or a new way, and that's really what the whole book, Canoeing the Mountains, is about, is understanding that your mission may not have changed, but how you get to the completion or the realization of the mission is going to have to adjust. That is just the nature of life as things change. As culture shifts and changes, our message doesn't change, but the how we deliver it, how we get there, adjusts sometimes. Mm-hmm. So he says that most churches end up focusing on those technical issues. And if we make those technical adjustments, then everything will be better. He doesn't necessarily identify it in the book, but I would even suggest things like the style of worship. I think those are still technical issues. When we spent decades fighting the worship wars, thinking, just believing, and really this is what, and maybe we'll end up talking about this, but this is what the evangelical church is kind of based on. If you change your technical things, if your music is more slick, if your children's ministry is banging, cool all that logo. Stuff, cool logo, people will show up. And what we have realized, well, not everyone has realized this, that is a failed experiment. Mm-hmm. The evangelical church in America is dead. All you have to do is look across the pond at England. They are about a generation ahead of us. So he makes the distinction between technical issues and adaptive challenges. And he really says, look, if you want to understand how you best serve the next generation and even the people that are currently at your church or could be coming to your church, you need to identify some adaptive challenges that you can address.
Well, I think sometimes we take adaptive issues and we just apply technical solutions.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
I think that's been I think that where we're at in the church in the West these days, we've been headed here for a long time. I mean, our world, it's changed dramatically in the last decade or two, but these changes started way back before that.
Yeah.
Right? With in the 60s and the 70s, right? Some of the culture revolution that was taking place. And the church's response, I mean, that's where so much of what we're dealing with these days, that's where the change, I think, is rooted.
Yeah.
And we don't, that's when we began to see that the church was losing its influence, or it was going to. And so our response was to assert our authority on one hand. And on the other hand, it was kind of a fear-based mechanism that was kind of circle the wagons. We've got to make everything right for the sake of our own sustainability. And we came up with technical solutions to it. I think the evangelical movement itself is a technical solution to a bigger problem. Because it's built all around that idea that we have to save the ship. We have to we have to keep the church, keep from losing the church and losing culture. And so everything was motivated by that fear.
So there's a few guys I've been listening to lately, and they keep saying that, we are so far downstream, right, from the sexual revolution, from the drug revolution, and we really shouldn't be surprised that this is where we're at, but here we are. And again, probably not being adaptive enough, and again, it's probably always easier to look back on the generation before and say, well, if they would have, but you go, well, here we are, right? And so what are we going to do?
Mm-hmm.
Right? How are we going to address these cultural issues and not be playing catch up, but right, trying to be in front of the curve, for sure.
Well, I think we have to do the same thing that Lewis and Clark and the Court of Discovery had to do, right? Is be willing to, first of all, name the way our context is changing. Right? If we're not willing to admit the fact that the way our context is changing, then what is there to adapt to?
Yeah.
And right, and
There's no more rivers.
right.
We've now come to mountains.
Well,
Yeah.
unless we refuse to admit that.
Well, but that's what you're saying, to your point, right? You got to name that.
Right. You got to name what is, rather than, living in your own delusion about it, which is easier, and I think it's easier, especially for, and I don't say this to be critical of older generations. I think naturally it's easier for them to not name it, because they could just ride out their time,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
I mean, and we've seen that happen in our churches, right? We've seen people who are in their 70s and 80s, look at it and go, I'm kind of too old to deal with this kind of stuff.
Yeah.
I'm not going on the adventure.
I'll tell you real quick. We had one of the Sundays I took off. We had one of our missionaries, his name was Jeff Badger. He came to speak, and we actually were leaving town that day, so we still had time, so we decided to come to church anyways. And he had already told me the story the week before on the phone, but he talked about this couple in a small group, and he asked them to share, because they were relatively new to this small group. He said, hey, why don't you tell everybody what you guys just did recently? And they're like, well, we adopted a 8-month-old baby from, I believe it was from Haiti, because that's where he does his mission work. And so they're talking about all the changes with this baby and stuff, and he says, why don't you tell everybody that here in the small group how old you guys are? And I think the husband was like 78 and the lady was like 82 or something. And but just that same thing of going, we're not going to stop.
Yeah.
Right? We're still able-bodied. We're still of sound mind. Let's adopt a baby from Haiti in there. And so just that to me it was an encouraging story, right?
Yeah.
Just to never stop, right? To never be finished, to not let what the culture would tell you, right? Oh, you should be in Arizona or Florida.
Yeah. It's your time.
Yeah, your time. Footloose, fancy free. And, which, of course, easy for me to say because I'm not there yet.
So I'll double down on your story, but take it the other direction. I was at a state conference in the Church of God, and this was, this is 21 now. This was easily 15 plus years ago. So it's just after the new millennium starts. There's a ton being written about postmodernity, the shift in how people connect with one another. The social media had not really hit wide at all, but the internet was really gaining a lot of traction. A lot of blogs, not a lot of videos, but a lot of written word out there. So churches were beginning to, and there were a lot of sociologists talking about the different ways that people were connecting with one another. It was kind of the resurgence of a lot of the arts and that kind of stuff. There were a lot of Christian leaders talking about how this was going to impact the church. And so a buddy of mine, we had done a lot of reading, just a lot of research. And at that time I think we were both still doing student ministry. And we were asked, because we had been kind of leading a wider conversation with some people who said to our state leaders, hey, what if we had these guys come and do just it was like an afternoon session. And I don't know, there were probably 50 or 60 people in that room. And it was really interesting. The conversation was lively. There were some folks that were like, this is, you're borderline talking about heresy. I mean, there were some folks who were really upset, and there were some folks going, I think this is probably where things are headed.
Yeah.
Not that we were that smart, because we're basically just telling everybody, hey, these are the things that are being written and said by people a lot smarter than us. Maybe we ought to pay attention to this.
Yeah.
We get down to the end of the conversation. Our time is almost up. And there's one pastor who stood up and said, I've realized something during this day, or this afternoon, this session, He said, I am almost at retirement, and I'm glad I don't have to deal with this. That was his approach. So he's already like
checked out.
Chips in, I'm done. And that's probably not. I can think of another pastor who didn't say it but did it. Just like, I'm coasting. Foot's off the gas. I see the finish line. All I got to do is get there.
Well, and that's the whole point. Back to the story, right? I mean, that's the whole thing with Lewis and Clark, right? Is they could have just said, you know what? Let's head back to D.C.
Turn the boats around.
Forget this,
let
right?
the stream carry us.
Yeah, you know.
That's somebody else's problem.
Yeah.
Let somebody else figure this thing out. So, so I think, and kind of back to the idea that we face these adaptive issues, right? If we're not willing to name the change, it becomes very easy to just come up with more technical solutions. So, you named the worship wars, right? I mean, that was the idea. Let's just create a praise team instead of having a choir, and we'll do, guitar-led music instead of piano-led music, and we're going to do this, and, have everybody, church has to have a drum kit, and down the line we went, right? As if that was somehow going to solve the problems happening within our culture.
Yeah.
Right.
Now, so we sit here and we say evangelicalism is a failed experiment, right? It didn't feel like a failed experiment throughout the 80s and much of the 90s. I mean, it's been in the last... I mean, now, it's now, right? 30, 40 years into this experiment. Now it's crumbling. And so we look at it, we saw it kind of rise and peak, and it looked like it was really good. But, how... I mean, just think for a moment. How many families that you know who raised their kids in the church throughout the 90s, early 2000s, and kind of the heyday of evangelicalism, right? I mean, it really hits its peak. And maybe very involved. And all of a sudden their kids are gone, and so are they.
Yep.
Right? They were never there for anything more meaningful than the experience.
Well, and I think we talked about this a little bit last episode too, but I think COVID has just really exposed that. I mean, the same thing. I mean, just like you guys, we have families that it's like we've been ghosted. Now, to their credit, maybe we've kind of ghosted them too, right? I mean, you know what I mean? That's a two-way street there. But at the same time, there's people who, I still haven't seen in a year and a half. And again, at least in our church system, I don't know what anybody gives, but I go out to the church mailbox and get the mail occasionally. And there's this one family in particular that said, I mean, I haven't seen them in a year and a half. And again, shame on me, because I haven't called them. I haven't written them. But I've seen what I am 99% sure is probably a tithing check. That they, and so it's just... so I don't know. For me, it's like there's some people that they at least believe in the mission, right? They at least believe, or I don't want to get into the psychosomatics of why they give or anything, but I at least feel encouraged by that.
Right.
But again, to me, this gets back to, and again, I don't think this is quite the technical. I think this maybe gets back to more the adaptive. And I just wonder how much stuff that youth ministry did have right. You know what I mean? Just the simple. And that might be the thing, is that we're so scared. I mean, they do look like mountains, right? You go, oh, how do we deal with COVID and doing church online? And, and you go, it's just about relationships, right?
Yeah.
And again, the big thing that maybe, I had this thought, and I think we maybe pretty much put this into words, but, let's do life together and not just do church together. And I think for a long time, that's all we've done is just done church together. And when and again, I don't want to make light of COVID, but you go, what's going to happen if crap really hits the fan? Are you really going to be there for me? Am I really going to be there for you?
Yeah.
Is that...
But man, I think it's... deeper than just do life together. It's let's live this mission together.
There you go. I like,
right? Because it's not just let's do church stuff together.
Yes.
Right? And lots of people live life together, but that doesn't mean that they're on mission together.
Yeah.
It really is. Let's. And so that's what I've struggled with the most. You know, we've had some folks this last year leave our church, and they all have their excuses. I'll leave that alone. Here's my struggle with it, right? Is the sense of abandonment that says, I thought we were on this mission together, right? They're not just people who came and worshipped in a space weekly, right? They're not just people who I was in relationship with and did life with.
Yeah.
They're people who I believed I was on this mission with, in the wilderness, in exile, whatever imagery you want to use. Together we were seeking to be the faithful people of God, and they walk, right? The heartache in that is not that we don't go to church together anymore, or that we're not doing life with them anymore. Although that has been difficult.
Sure.
I mean, our daughter just turned a year old, and it was the faces that were absent at her for her to celebrate her 1-year birthday compared to our older kids, right, was clear. So that does hurt, but what hurts the most is that you broke the covenant, right? You walked off the mission. Yeah. And so, again, I think sometimes leaving is a technical solution to an adaptive problem.
Yep.
I don't want to have to name it, so I'll just go here.
Yes.
They don't make me name it. We can sit in a canoe right in the middle of a freaking field. But at least I'm in my
and
canoe,
everybody goes,
doggone it.
all right, paddle on the
Right.
right.
Well, and that's what, and I don't know my history well enough. Did anybody from Lewis and Clark's entourage say, yep, not doing that? Right? I'm taking the next wagon train back east. You know what I mean?
I would love to know that.
You know what I mean? I mean, that'd be something interesting to just to dig into that story a little bit too, where you go, yeah, you guys are nuts, man. Forget this.
No, I don't think so. Only because I'm not sure. I mean, the thing about explorers and that era,
Safety in numbers, right?
safety numbers, but not only that, like,
On the other hand, people
I
give
don't-
up every day. So.
I don't think that they were a team like we would approach a team. I think that was, anything of your explorers, I think they were maybe a little more authoritarian than maybe,
Like I said, I've
burn
been
the
out.
ships, right?
Well,
Cortez
that's
gets
what
over here and goes, you want to
Yeah.
go back?
Good luck.
Burn these babies, right?
Yeah.
Well, I'm telling you, I've been out west. I wouldn't do that in a wagon. No way, man. Holy cow.
Those
I
are,
mean, they were taking their lives in their own hands, really.
Absolutely.
I mean, it's
a lot of them died. You played Oregon Trail?
that's.
We
could do a whole episode on that, so let's not digress into.
There's a new TV show, Oregon. It's
They have a
Oregon
board
Trail.
game for it. So, stop. See, we need to get back on mission. Back on point.
50 minutes we can't use.
So I
Oh,
mean,
man.
so I think we have to. So the question, the difficult question becomes: how do we, as leaders in Christ's church, create space for people to identify that change without our response being fear-based, right? Because that's what we've been conditioned to do for 3 generations. And so, I mean, what is our response in our churches when COVID hits and people don't come back? We get afraid, and so we begin trying to think about what is our solutions to these problems based on our fear that people aren't coming back, or we're going to take a financial hit, and so anytime we're operating out of a place of fear, we don't have the capacity to be adaptive. All we can do is come up with technical solutions to try to solve the problem.
I was just looking over stuff for sermon for this Sunday. We were talking about Peter, and one of the highlights from his life, obviously, him walking on water, right? And that's the whole thing, right? It was fear.
Yeah.
You get out of the boat, and because he was fearful, he began to sink. And so it's that same. And again, and I don't know. Because, I think people always, well, what about the shepherd leaving the 99 sheep for the one? And you go, yeah, but at some point you just march ahead, right? And the sheep either follow you to that greener pasture or the still waters, or they don't. And maybe that's, I don't know, maybe that's not the right answer. But
Well,
I think at some point you go, we're climbing the mountain. You know what I mean? You can stay down here in the valley and
I think the
stick to the rivers
difference
and the lakes that you're
is the posture we assume in that moment.
Sure. Okay.
Right? So think about, we're going to kind of use in some ways the Mark Driscoll Rise and Fall of Church Hill narrative, right? So in at one moment in that series, there, he's talking about having kicked some leaders out of his church.
Yep.
He goes to his preacher's conference and says, there's a pile of bodies behind us, and God willing, by the time it's done, it'll be a mountain. You get on this bus or you get off, right? So what's his posture in that?
Yeah.
You're either with me or you're dead.
He was happy and proud about
right.
that. Yeah.
If our posture is grief and lament, right? I mean, even Jesus lost some along the way, and not just Judas, right? I mean, there's crowds of people who look at him and go, I'm just not interested in this, right?
Eat my flesh, drink my blood.
Precisely.
Out. Yeah, I'm out.
So there's something to be said for, yes, you leave and search for the one, but if the one wants to sit, right, doesn't want to be a part of the herd. I mean, God is a perfect gentleman, right? He doesn't force himself on anybody. He pursues us.
Yep.
Hound of heaven, right? He pursues us without ceasing.
Yeah.
But he never clobbers us and,
Caveman. Yeah,
right.
Yeah, amen.
So, I mean, it's difficult. And here's their piece. If evangelicalism is a technical solution, right, to an adaptive problem, the whole movement itself is that, and we don't want to be fear-based, you look at the history of evangelicalism and you go, geez, look how successful it appeared to be for a time. How do we wrestle with, let me make sure I articulate this well. Evangelicalism, though it was a failed experiment, appeared to be very successful, right? Churches grew like crazy.
Sure.
If you walk away from the technical issues and you're no longer willing to be in fear, and instead you begin to name the changes in the world for what it is and begin to do adaptive leadership, if you have the masses, they're probably not going to stick around very long, and if you don't have the masses, you're never going to grow them very fast. Mm-hmm. And so it's easy to look at evangelicalism and say, no, here, look how successful this was. Whereas now we look at it and you go, do you get what I'm asking? Like it appeared like there's a bunch of really good fruit, and there's no fruit this way.
I think this was the rub with the Mars Hill thing and Mark Driscoll, right? That was what everybody. Hey, it looks like good fruit. It looks like good things are going on. And again, I think that's just the messy thing of God's grace, right? That. And I guess as you were talking to, I think about Paul, who, what does he use, right? He uses the Roman road system, right? He uses the being able to travel, and again, he uses the tools of his time to spread the gospel. And the same thing, isn't afraid to leave John Mark or whoever. Fine, if you're going to be a punk, whatever, wuss out on me, fine, whatever, I'm going, and again, so we're back to that. Yeah, what's the posture, right? Again, I don't think he was happy about having to leave him behind, but so yeah.
But I think my question is for us as leaders: how do we help the people within our churches grapple with the fact that you want to embrace adaptive change?
Sure.
You want to start climbing the mountains instead of right?
Sure.
You're probably not going to be a church with a big budget and an easy road and lots of people, right? How do we handle that? How do we handle the fact that growth doesn't come easy, right? The kind of growth that we're conditioned to want.
Worldly growth,
right?
Worldly success, yeah.
Because that's the hard part, right? How do you continue to persevere through that? And I think, and this is the challenge that this book raises, that Todd Bolsinger ultimately had to wrestle with and resolve, or seek to resolve in the next book, Tempered Resilience, which we'll eventually get to. When we begin to make adaptive changes, there can be immense fallout from that. And do we have the capacity to stand in the face of that fallout? Whether that's people walking away, whether that's a lack of growth that would be otherwise motivating you to keep on, whether that's, everybody around you thinking you're nuts.
Yeah, because we have heard from people at different stages in adaptive changes who are willing to walk away and say, I guess we just didn't know what it was going to cost us. To say things like that and go, really, I mean, okay, yeah, we were in it until we weren't. We were with you until we just couldn't do it anymore. And you can be the greatest communicator, and the vision can be very clear, and opportunities for conversation, and people won't take you up on it. And people will say, yeah, I'm with you, I'm with you, I'm with you. And then one day pull the plug and go, can't be with you anymore. Because we are largely conditioned out of a modern mindset where technical issues have technical solutions. And what we're talking about in adaptive solutions, it's not straightforward. It's much more gray and murky. It's not 2 + 2 = 4. It's 2 + y over, it's algebra. And I don't even understand algebra. And yet that is kind of what, I mean, you look at the life that Jesus leads and the way that he engages with people and who he engages, he is constantly ticking people off. He's constantly, the church folks are always mad at him. I mean, that's essentially who the Pharisees were. They're the church folks.
Yep.
So if you find yourself angry at offerings of grace and mercy and gentleness and peace, and you find yourself frustrated with those things, but you're more interested in conversations that surround strength and power and might and liberty, you're probably more of a Pharisee than one of the disciples. And that's the kind of thing that is very frustrating, because when if you've been at church for most of your life, and if you're honest enough with yourself, or someone speaks into your life and says, hey, that sounds a little bit more like a Pharisee, that is very disturbing. That's very frustrating. As I've been a Pharisee, I know the Pharisees are. Don't call me a Pharisee. I mean, that is the reaction.
Yeah.
And yet everything that comes out of your mouth sounds more like Pharisee than woman at the well, whom Jesus isn't even supposed to be talking to.
Yeah. Well, that's what, we discussed this yesterday at lunch. I mean, again, I don't remember who that guy was, but the thing with Mother Teresa, right, where he goes to serve, in her mission, and, has this pie in the sky idea of what that is going to be to serve on the streets of Calcutta with of all people, Mother Teresa,
Right.
And gets there and is essentially told to have a seat and hold a dying baby in his hands. And, it's just is like, appalled that's the work, the, quote unquote work.
And he goes there with the best of intentions. He's looking forward. This is like a bucket list of serving opportunities. So he goes there with the right heart, saying, I cannot wait to serve alongside this wonderful person, these broken people. And she gives him this basic, seemingly in his mind, menial job, and yet it is the most important thing that he can do while he's there.
And I think it's that kind of stuff, that you go, again, we get all wrapped up in, well, is everything ready for Sunday? And we got the right music picked out that's going to make everybody happy, and, right? I mean, and you're like...
I gave up on that
one.
Yeah, that's what...
I gave up on that a long time ago.
No matter what songs you're singing.
No, it doesn't matter. But we've become all consumed with that.
Yeah.
And we've missed...
Technical. Technical's easier.
Yeah.
And like you hit the nail on the head. The modern era taught us that technical problems have technical solutions, right? We need an efficient way to go from here to here. Let's create the automobile, right? Let's create internal combustion engine. Let's do this. We need, how do we fly?
Technical mindset brought us to the place of medicine where we understand more about the body than we ever have. Wonderful. Let's continue to do that. But let's stop applying a technical mindset to something that requires adaptive abilities.
Absolutely. And again, when you live in a technical world, it becomes very difficult to sell being adaptive.
Boy,
right?
That's the truth. Yes.
And getting people to give themselves over to that. And I think as leaders in the church, we have to kind of crucify, if that's a word, lament, probably all the above, that the desire for that success, or even with people within our church, right? The belief that numerical growth in all of its facets, whether that's square footage, whether that's budgets, whether that's people, whether that's whatever, might not equal faithfulness.
Yeah.
And we have to be willing, and this is probably less of an issue for you, but we have to be willing, truthfully,
you're not a very faithful
to
person.
shuck the systems that are put upon us,
Yes.
right? That tell us those numerical factors are what's most important.
Yeah.
I mean, do they indicate something? Sure, maybe most days, but
I was just thinking about at the beginning of Job, right, where he has his friends. Probably the best thing that any of his friends did with him, right, is they just sat there with him for a week in silence, right, not to offer any advice, right, not to. Right,
Which is good, because when the advice starts to come, it's not great.
It's not good.
No, just you guys need to shut up again.
Yeah, it's not good at all. And so I think even sometimes just like that, right? This just, I guess, just brings me back to, while the problems may seem insurmountable or super complicated, I wonder if the solutions are pretty doggone simple.
Yeah.
Can you just sit there and shut up? Right? Can you hold a dying child? Can you just be present?
So maybe this is reflective of what you were saying earlier about student ministry. I mean, one of the primary things that I did at both churches that I had the privilege of serving was simply get to know the kids that were already coming, but the kids that weren't coming yet, that were friends of the kids that were coming. Show up at their sporting events. I had at both places, when I first arrived there, I would go to their sporting events, and there were several kids that asked me, "Why are you here?" your kids, I know your kids are like little. They're not playing. Why are you here? And I'm like, well, I'm here to see you play, to see these other kids play. And they're like, yeah, but why? and just that, because we have lost the plot a little bit.
Yep.
And that's not even about church. That's about life right now, because everything is digital. Everything is, TikTok, Instagram stuff. And that's all fun stuff. I spent some time last night scrolling through Instagram, looking at all kinds. I laughed my butt off.
Yeah.
It's great. It's fun. It does not replace real, legitimate relationship.
Yep.
yeah.
And this leads us, I think we talked before we started recording, probably for a future episode with tempered resilience, but it's that trust factor.
Yes.
Right? And I think adults just tend to be more jaded for a whole host of reasons.
Yes.
Whereas I think, and again, not that we don't have students who, probably a lot of students now that have grown up much tougher lives than probably you or I did, versus our parents did. But by and large, kids are fairly trusting, right? Fairly open, honest, blunt.
Somebody leans into them.
Sure.
And shows them a measure of love and respect that maybe they're not getting anywhere else. This becomes dangerous. It certainly has its pitfalls. So we have to be wise about this.
Yep.
But I think the adult who is jaded, I think that desire for a deep relationship with other people that trust that they can trust, I think it's right below the surface. There's for a lot of them, I think there's a hard shell over top that's been built up over years of mental, physical, sexual abuse, just to start.
Yep.
But I don't think there's. It take a little bit to get below the surface.
Yeah.
To kind of expose the soft heart that I think is there, because I mean that's something that God, I think, has put inside of us, regardless of our history or where we've come from, what we've experienced. There is a soft heart there. Mm-hmm. It's sometimes covered up by some armor, but
I would move your heart, son, give your heart of flesh, right?
Mm-hmm.
Or if only Jesus had said something like, "We have to become like children."
Yeah.
But thinking about these texts, these technical.
If only.
If only.
If only.
You know, one of you said something about we've overcomplicated, or I know you did something about youth ministry. What do we see Jesus doing? He's got 3 years, right? For 3 years, he ministers. He is the God man, right? He is God incarnate here on earth.
Yep.
And how does he choose to spend those 3 years? And he tells Peter, on this rock, on this confession, I will build my church. How does he do that work of building his church? He doesn't assemble a board of directors. He doesn't file incorporation paperwork. He doesn't build a building and fill it with pews. He doesn't establish a worship style.
No.
Right? He says, I've come to proclaim good news to the poor. And relief, right, to the oppressed.
Yep.
Sight to the blind, right?
Repent. Kingdom of God is near.
Exactly, right? He spends his time. He's God. God in the flesh. He's got 3 years on this earth before he's crucified to establish his church. And how does he do it? Spending time with people.
And when he says the kingdom of God is near, he's not talking about the second coming.
Right.
He's talking about what it means to be
here.
in community
Right.
with other people. That is every story that Jesus starts out, hey, the kingdom of God is like. Pay attention to the details, because it's not about us all flying away and the earth exploding. That is not the picture he paints.
It's what I'm doing. It's what he's doing right here, right now. What I'm doing in these moments.
Yeah.
Here's the new kind of way
Be present.
that I am creating.
Yep.
Right. And and so I just feel like if we as the church could remember
There's a whole series on that.
Yeah, that's right.
Incarnational theology, parts 1 and 2. From last
well,
season.
and even how we think about his death, right? What is he's happening at the cross, right? The cross is the kind of culmination of that ministry, that reconciliatory ministry. I think if we as the church, if we're going to talk about adaptive change, we're going to talk about being never been here before, if now isn't the time to have that conversation, when is?
Yeah.
Yeah.
If now is not the time to say, man, we spend a whole lot of our time doing things that just aren't what Jesus did. And
If only we had some
in his
bracelets
name,
and some
thank
t-shirts.
goodness.
What
The
would
t-shirts,
what would
t-shirts
what would
that
Jesus do?
especially if they're t-shirts that look like other logos.
The Google font.
Yeah, I had a few of those.
Okay. Me too. I don't.
But-
Sucking on the tailpipe of culture.
Lord's Gym.
You know,
Bench pressing the cross.
Guys, man, I was ready to take up offering there after Jake was.
I drifted into unusable content.
Yeah. It's,
I mean,
you
don't get me wrong, the gathering is important, right? Jesus gathered,
Yeah, absolutely.
being instructed and learning and being formed. But if we're not willing to have those conversations about, okay, this is what it comes back to, the mission piece, this is what comes back to what's driving what we do. We can't do adaptive change if, one, we're not willing to name that there's an issue, the context has changed, and two, if we don't know what that thing deep within us is. And if it's not the life and ministry of Jesus, if it's some other bureaucratic or organizational structure, we are really missing.
Yeah. Because the biggest problem for those that resist the adaptive change is their definition of what we're doing is built around that Sunday morning thing staying the same, staying unchanged. And it's like, here's the box, stay within the box, but don't really move too much stuff around in the box.
Yep.
Keep that the same.
And so long as you show up for the box.
Yeah.
And it used to be Sunday evening, Wednesday evening, but life just got too busy for those. You know, God forbid we gather with the saints more than once a week.
I mean, it's not like he died for us or anything.
Right. But
Got dance class and jiu-jitsu. Come on, please.
there's kind of my point. Like, we have created this culture in the church where we've said, you know what? And this is the mark of evangelicalism. How low can we set the bar to get the most people in because we believe God's pissed off at them, and we've absolutely got to get them in the doors, because if we don't, they are just damned forever. So we said, how low can we set the bar? You know what? Wherever you want to do, 6 days out of the week, 6.5 days out of the week, it's fine. You'd be like, just come to church, sing our songs, pray this prayer. A tithe check would be nice. And we just kind of, I mean, the culture
Like the Catholic Church.
I was just gonna say that sounds more
low
Catholic.
blow, blah, blah. But that's
Sorry to all the Catholics out there.
Step into this booth and never mind.
That's the culture we have created in the church that says, and we wonder why the world looks at us and goes,
Why do I want that? Yeah.
and again, if I could only say, we spent a lot of time not doing the things Jesus did.
Yeah.
Now, you can build the church on that movement.
Mm-hmm.
You can't build a following. The way that we would talk about it in our culture.
Yeah.
You're probably not going to have a grandiose building that you can sit on, pay for, to use a couple of hours a week. Such good stewards. And you're not going to have, be the biggest church in town.
Mm-hmm.
But man, you can make the kingdom become a reality.
Yeah.
Amen. That's some good preaching. Well, I'd say that's good. I don't know if there's much more to.
I probably would get too sarcastic if I keep.
You were going 2 cuss words in like one. That was great.
I said pissed off
And, you said,
and damned to hell in context.
Never mind.
My wife doesn't like that word. Maybe it is a cuss word.
That's what. We'll have to do a whole nother separate episode on cussing, where we won't let Jake
just
talk.
go pray a sinner's prayer. It'll be all right.
That's not how that works. That's called cheap grace. Okay, thank you. Thanks for tuning into the Gospel Jazz. May the peace of the Lord be upon you and your family. And again, thanks for tuning in. Hit that like, hit that subscribe button, and would love to hear from you if you have any suggestions, comments, good, bad.